This week, Brisbane City Council handed down its biggest announcement of the year, with rate rises confirmed, a multi-billion-dollar plan to save the Story Bridge, and new spending commitments across the city. At the same time, Queensland has announced new housing initiatives, major upgrades for Suncorp Stadium, and a range of projects aimed at preparing the region for continued growth. And while politicians are promising more homes, new analysis is raising questions about whether the construction industry can actually keep up. I'm Adam, and this is the Brisbane Channel, your independent source of information on all things Greater Brisbane. Let's get updated. Before we jump into it, I'll just let you know that I'm at the tail end of fighting off a pretty nasty flu, so I'm going to try and get through this without coughing, sneezing, or any of the other things that come with the flu. But if you notice an abnormally high number of cuts in this particular episode, you'll know why that is. Anyway, let's get on with it. This week, Brisbane City Council handed down its budget for the next financial year, revealing how much you'll be paying in rates, what's planned for the Story Bridge, and where billions of dollars could be spent over the coming decades. The average owner-occupier will see rates increase by 3.97%, which works out to around $63 per year, or about $1.22 per week. That's below the recent inflation rate of 4.6% and substantially lower than some other South East Queensland councils. However, the increase isn't evenly distributed. Some suburbs, including mine here in Algesta, are facing increases of around 7.4%, while rates are actually falling slightly in places including Dutton Park, Fairfield, St Lucia and Yeronga. One point that attracted criticism from multiple directions wasn't a spending decision, but how the budget itself is presented. During the budget briefing, Deputy Mayor Fiona Cunningham explained that Council has changed the way some costs are allocated throughout the budget documents. Council argues the new model provides a clearer picture of the true cost of delivering projects and services. However, it also means many figures are no longer directly comparable with previous years, making it harder for observers to track spending changes over time. Labor has also criticised the change, arguing it reduces transparency. It may sound like an accounting technicality, but it could become an important point in future budget debates because both supporters and critics of the council may find it harder to compare spending trends over time. But the biggest single announcement in Brisbane City Council's budget wasn't a new road, a new bridge, or a new transport project. It was a bridge we already have. Brisbane City Council has revealed that renewing the Story Bridge over the next 2 decades could cost around $3.6 billion in today's dollars. That's an enormous figure. To put it in perspective, it's comparable to the estimated cost of the proposed new Brisbane Stadium at Victoria Park. Council says the alternative could be even more expensive. According to the latest Story Bridge Renewal Progress Update, doing nothing could ultimately cost around $6.4 billion, while replacing the bridge entirely could exceed $8.5 billion once construction, traffic impacts, and demolition costs are taken into account. The bridge is now 85 years old and nearing the end of its 100-year design life. Council says major works are needed to extend its life by another century. Under the proposed plan, Brisbane City Council would contribute around $135 million over the next 6 years, while seeking approximately $1.08 billion from the federal government and $135 million from the state government for the first stage of works leading up to 2032. The works would include repairs to aging steel and concrete, replacement of lighting and services, removal of lead paint, strengthening of critical structural elements, and upgrades to maintenance access systems. The Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner says he's confident both other levels of government will contribute. But not everyone agrees with the council's handling of the situation. Labor opposition leader Jared Cassidy argues council was warned years ago about the bridge's condition and should have acted sooner, describing the announcement as a multi-billion-dollar admission of failure. The opposition has pointed to documents obtained through right to information requests, which say they show council was warned about significant maintenance requirements years ago. Cassidy has also questioned whether the state government should be contributing more than the 10% share currently proposed by council. Regardless of where you sit politically, one thing seems increasingly clear. The debate is no longer whether major work needs to happen on the Story Bridge. The debate is who pays for it, how quickly it happens, and whether earlier intervention could have reduced the eventual bill. Beyond the Story Bridge, the budget includes a $110 million road resurfacing program, continued funding for Brisbane Metro operations and planning, upgrades to parks across the city, additional bikeway projects including the next stage of the CityLink cycleway, expanded exercise programs, and an increase to the maximum pensioner rates rebate. Independent councillor Nicole Johnston has questioned whether enough progress has already been made on previously announced infrastructure commitments, while the Greens have argued the budget prioritises the wrong projects altogether. One thing I'll be interested to compare is how Brisbane's budget stacks up against the other major councils across Greater Brisbane. Moreton Bay Council has already released its budget, while Ipswich and Redlands City are both due to hand down their budgets on June 30th. Logan's budget is also expected on Monday. Once all of those budgets are available, I'll put together a dedicated comparison looking at rates, spending priorities, and some of the major projects planned across the region. Housing was also a major theme across several announcements this week, with governments at both the local and state level continuing to search for ways to accommodate a rapidly growing population. The state government has announced an additional $100 million for social and community housing, taking its total commitment to around $5.7 billion over the next 4 years. Treasurer David Janetsky said the government is targeting around 2,000 new social and community homes per year, while Housing Minister Sam O'Connor says there are currently around 6,500 homes either under contract or under construction. The announcement comes just days after the government defended its decision to remove affordable housing requirements from certain state-facilitated developments. The government's argument is that those requirements were making some projects financially unviable and reducing the overall supply of housing. Critics, however, argue that removing those requirements could make it even harder to deliver housing that remains affordable for lower and middle-income Queenslanders. Meanwhile, the first project under the state government's land activation program has taken another step forward. A former government-owned site at Banyo is set to be redeveloped with a mix of housing, including 207 townhouses, 64 affordable housing units, and a new 180-bed aged care facility. It's worth noting that while government announcements often refer to more than 450 homes being delivered on the site, that figure includes the aged care component as well as the residential housing. The government has also launched a major review of the South East Queensland Regional Plan, which will examine where future housing should be built as the region continues to grow. With South East Queensland expected to accommodate the vast majority of Queensland's population growth over the coming decades, the review will look at increasing housing supply in areas with access to jobs, transport, and existing infrastructure. Taken together, these announcements point to a government heavily focused on increasing housing supply. But while there has been no shortage of housing announcements lately, new analysis released this week suggests delivering those homes may be easier said than done. Property consultancy Charter Keck Kramer has warned that more than 15,000 apartments across Brisbane and the Gold Coast could face delays or delivery challenges as the region approaches a period of intense construction activity leading into the 2032 Olympics. The firm argues the issue isn't necessarily a lack of projects in the pipeline, but whether there will be enough construction capacity, labour and resources available to build them. It's worth noting that Charter Keck Kramer works extensively with developers, investors, and other property industry clients. That doesn't necessarily mean the analysis is, untrustworthy, but understanding who produced a report is often just as important as understanding what it says. And the broader challenge being highlighted isn't unique to this report. Approving homes, funding homes, and announcing homes are all important steps. But actually getting them built is something else entirely. At the same time, a recent study from researchers at UNSW suggests that housing affordability is influenced by a wide range of factors beyond supply alone, including construction costs, population growth, investor activity, and broader economic conditions. Which means that as governments continue announcing new housing initiatives, the real test won't just be how many homes are approved. It will be how many are ultimately built, who can afford them, and whether they make a meaningful difference to housing costs over the long term. If you run a local business, you'll know that finding new customers can be difficult and expensive. Sometimes the biggest opportunity is simply encouraging the customers you already have to come back more often. That's where Royalty Rewards comes in. It's a Brisbane-developed digital loyalty platform designed to help local businesses reward repeat customers and build stronger relationships with the people already walking through their doors. Rather than trying to explain everything here, I've put together a short video that walks through exactly how it works, along with details of the current free trial opportunities available for businesses that get involved early. You'll find the link in the description below, and even if you don't own a business yourself, if there's a local cafe, salon, tradie, or other small business owner in your life who you think could benefit from something like this, feel free to send it their way. Now let's move from housing to one of Brisbane's other big long-term challenges, preparing for a growing calendar of major events. The Queensland Government has unveiled what it describes as the biggest upgrade to Suncorp Stadium since the venue reopened in its current form more than 2 decades ago. The project will include a new wraparound LED ribbon board suspended beneath one roof, giant media mesh screens on the outside of the stadium, new terrace viewing areas behind both goalposts, entertainment zones, and an increasing capacity of around 1,000 spectators. The government says the focus is on improving the fan experience and ensuring Suncorp remains one of the country's premier rectangular stadiums for major sporting events and concerts. It's worth noting that Stadiums Queensland and venue operators have an obvious interest in attracting more events and larger crowds to the venue. However, one point that does seem broadly accepted is that major stadia often require significant upgrades after around 20 years of operation, particularly when they host the number of events Suncorp does. Not everyone is convinced the upgrades go far enough, though. One of the most common criticisms online has been that the project of this scale only increases capacity by around 1,000 seats. Some fans have argued the focus should be on substantially increasing capacity, while others continue to push for a roof over the stadium. Premier David Crisafulli has acknowledged that the initial capacity increase is relatively modest, describing the announcement as the first stage of a broader upgrade program and indicating additional capacity increases could potentially be considered in the future. The government's response is that this project is less about fitting more people into the venue and more about improving the overall experience for those already attending. Another Olympic project that quietly moved forward this week is the Brisbane Athletes Village. The state government announced the appointment of the architectural team that will design the project, which will be located at the RNA Showgrounds, along with the proposed upgraded main arena. The village is expected to accommodate around 10,000 athletes and officials during the Games across approximately 1,800 apartments. After the Olympics, those apartments are planned to be converted into permanent housing through a mix of build-to-rent and build-to-sell developments. It's one of the more significant legacy projects associated with the Brisbane 2032 Olympics because, unlike a stadium, its long-term success won't be measured by sporting events, but by what it contributes to Brisbane's housing supply after the Games are over. The appointment of the design team doesn't mean construction is imminent, but it does represent another step forward for a project that has received relatively little attention compared with the other various stadium announcements. Meanwhile, another sign that Brisbane's Olympic plans are gradually moving from announcements to reality has emerged at Victoria Park. Thousands of items from the former Victoria Park Golf Complex are now being auctioned off following the precinct's closure at the end of May. Everything from golf carts and groundskeeping equipment to hospitality and events infrastructure is being sold as the site transitions towards its future role as the location of Brisbane's proposed Olympic Stadium. The auction itself isn't major news, but it does provide a visible reminder that the site's previous chapter has now closed. Taken together, the Suncorp upgrade and the ongoing transition at Victoria Park show how Brisbane's major events infrastructure is beginning to evolve ahead of 2032. Whether you support all of the decisions being made or not, many of the plans that have been debated for years are gradually moving from concepts and announcements into physical changes on the ground. While major projects tend to attract the headlines, Brisbane's day-to-day transport network also received some updates this week. Brisbane City Council has released preliminary designs for the next stage of its CityLink cycleway project, with plans for a new 1.2-kilometre separated bikeway along Shaftston Avenue between Kangaroo Point and Mowbray Park. The project would create dedicated space for cyclists and scooter riders while separating them from pedestrians, addressing a section of the route where different users currently share relatively narrow pathways. Once completed, the Shaftston Avenue section will connect into the Kangaroo Point Bridge and broader CityLink cycleway network, helping create a more direct route between Brisbane's eastern suburbs and the CBD. Council says the Kangaroo Point Bridge has already recorded around 5 million trips since opening, which it argues demonstrates growing demand for active transport infrastructure. The proposal has also been welcomed by Bicycle Queensland, whose CEO Matt Burke says the project would help create a safer connection between the Kangaroo Point Bridge and Brisbane's eastern suburbs. However, he also argues that council shouldn't lose sight of the long-planned Riverside Bikeway along Kangaroo Point, describing its incomplete state as a missed opportunity in Brisbane's active transport network. It's worth noting that Brisbane City Council has been steadily increasing its investment in active transport over recent years, while cycling advocacy groups continue to argue that much larger investments are needed if Brisbane wants to significantly reduce car dependency. Either way, this latest project reflects a broader trend that we're seeing across Greater Brisbane. As the region grows, simply adding more road capacity becomes increasingly difficult and expensive, particularly in established suburbs. That means councils and governments are increasingly looking at a mix of public transport, active transport, and road upgrades rather than relying on any single solution. We're seeing that approach reflected elsewhere across the region as well. In the Redlands, planning continues for how the region will accommodate future growth and transport demand. Redlands City Council has adopted a long-term transport plan for Cleveland, focusing on improving walking, cycling and public transport connections while maintaining access for motorists and people with disabilities. The plan also supports higher density development around key transport hubs and outlines a vision for how Cleveland could evolve over the coming decades as the region's population continues to grow. Of course, as with any long-term planning document, the real measure of success won't be the plan itself, but what ultimately gets delivered. While we're on the topic of planning for the future, a Brisbane Times report this week highlighted the role local communities play in preparing for the region's next major flood. At the Benawara Neighbourhood Centre in Graceville, staff and volunteers have been helping residents develop local flood response plans, identify vulnerable neighbours, and build networks that can be activated during emergencies. One local group has even compiled information on who has spare accommodation, hire ground for vehicles, chainsaws, and other resources that could prove useful during a flood. The article also highlighted concerns that much of this work relies on short-term funding and grants, creating uncertainty about whether these programs can continue long-term. It's a reminder that while flood resilience often focuses on infrastructure, flood maps, and drainage projects, community preparedness is also a part of the equation. And if Greater Brisbane's history tells us anything, it's that there will eventually be a next major flood. A quick shout out to channel sponsor YB Painting. They recently picked up 2 first and 3 second place awards at the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025, which gives you an idea of the standard they're working at. They offer fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim an exclusive 10% discount by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the description. The next update is not as sexy as many of the bigger announcements and debates we've covered, but can still have a massive impact on our lives here in Greater Brisbane and across the state. The state government has launched a new 10-year waste strategy aimed at reducing the amount of rubbish ending up in landfill and improving Queensland's recycling performance. The strategy is backed by almost $1 billion over the next 5 years, including funding for new recycling infrastructure, organics recycling programs, and waste innovation projects. The government says Queensland currently has the second lowest recycling rate in Australia and is targeting a statewide recycling rate of 65% by 2035. As always, it's worth noting that claims about the performance of previous governments come from the current government itself. However, Queensland recycling rate does sit below most other states according to national waste data. Several local councils are set to benefit from the first round of funding, including almost $7.8 million for Brisbane City Council and nearly $6.9 million for Logan City Council to support new resource recovery infrastructure. The strategy also includes continued expansion of FOGO services, which stands for Food Organics and Garden Organics, with hundreds of thousands of green lid bins already being rolled out across Queensland. These are the kinds of initiatives that don't get much attention but are becoming increasingly important as our region continues to grow. Meanwhile, growth continues to be a major focus in Moreton Bay. The Deputy Premier has approved a temporary local planning instrument for Narangba East, paving the way for the future development in the area while longer-term planning continues. Supporters argue measures like this are necessary to accommodate South East Queensland's rapid population growth and help deliver more housing. Critics, however, often raise concerns about whether roads, public transport, and other infrastructure can keep pace with development. Growth isn't the only thing changing across the region. Over in Logan, the council is changing how major decisions are scrutinised. Councillors will now work through a series of standing committees focused on different parts of the council operations, with the aim of providing more detailed oversight before decisions reach council chamber. It may not be the most exciting announcement of the week, but these behind-the-scenes governance changes can influence how effectively councils manage everything from infrastructure projects to community services. And back in Moreton Bay, a new outdoor gallery project is bringing public art into open community spaces, giving residents another reason to explore the region's parks, pathways, and waterfront areas. It's a smaller story than many we've discussed today, but projects like these help shape the character of a growing region beyond simply adding more homes, roads, and infrastructure. And if you value having an independent voice covering what's happening across Greater Brisbane, I just wanted to quickly thank everyone who supports the Brisbane channel through memberships or buy me a coffee. The reality is that putting these videos and podcasts together involves a lot more than simply reporting the news. It's attending events, building relationships across the region, digging through planning documents, and trying to bring you a balanced picture of what's happening. On average, around 36 hours of work goes into each of these update videos. If you find value in what I do and you'd like to help keep it going, you can become a channel member using the join button below, or shout me a coffee through the link in the description. There's absolutely no pressure. Watching, commenting, and sharing these videos helps enormously as well. But for those who do choose to support the channel financially, you're helping make independent coverage of Greater Brisbane possible, and I'm incredibly grateful for that support. If you missed last week's update video, that's it here. And here's the playlist, which now has 3 podcasts that you can enjoy here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. And it looks like I made it through. I'm done. Oops, that's still rolling.